free to say hi in the chat. Let everyone know who you are and where you're connecting from. We have people joining us from Zoom and on YouTube, and there are chat functions on both platforms, and we have members of our Q&A team to say hi in the chat, in the background, working to collate your comments and your questions. If you're on YouTube and you can't see the chat, you will need to sign in with an email if you're not already logged in. So a warm welcome to everyone just joining. We'll be starting very shortly. We're just giving everyone time to connect on Zoom and on YouTube. While you're waiting, you'll notice that we have 2 funding calls open just now for community nurses. Our Queen's Nurse Development Programme, which requires applicants to be nominated by their health board or employer. And you can see some information on the screen now just now. And also our Catalyst for Change small grants programme, which launches today. And so community nurses working anywhere in Scotland can apply to us directly for up to £5,000 to take forward a project that will help address health inequalities. If you'd like to keep in touch with QNIS, please follow us on our social media or sign up for our newsletter, and you'll find links in the chat as we go through the session. We've recently been exploring a range of different ways that we can connect with others and also flourish ourselves. And through the pandemic, one of the ways that we've been doing that is through poetry. So for this conference, we've invited a poet to join each of our sessions so they can listen, write, and then share their thoughts with us at the end. So we look forward to hearing that at the close of our session, just before 5 o'clock. And so I think that we are almost ready to begin this 3rd session in our series of online events. So a very warm welcome from the trustees and the staff of QNIS. My name is Sarah Doyle, and I'm the Deputy Nurse Director at QNIS, and I'm your host for this session. QNIS is a small charity, 132 years old, and our mission is to support community-based nurses and midwives as catalysts for change, making Scotland a fairer, kinder, and greener place to live. And that's really the focus of our sessions over the next couple of days, an exploration of how we might really make that a reality. We know things have been tough over the last 18 months and the pressure continues. We hope that these sessions offer a little bit of inspiration and some energy, and that's why they're free, as our way of recognising the immense contribution that community nurses and midwives have made in our collective effort to stay safe and well and to support the people of Scotland through the pandemic. Whether you've been working from home, online from an office, or out and about in PPE, thank you. We've all contributed, and we've all been under pressure, whatever the role that you've taken on. Many of us have had to contend with our own ill health or that of our families. Many nurses have contracted COVID or needed to take time out to support their own mental health. And so we are very glad to have all of you with us this afternoon. So each of our sessions is a conversation between people who bring different perspectives to a theme. You'll hear a keynote speaker who will be followed by 2 keynote listeners who've been invited to respond, each bringing their own experience to the narrative. We'll then invite all 3 to open the conversation with one another before asking you to share your own comments and questions to enrich the discussion. Our topic this afternoon is planetary health, sustainability, and the role and voice of community nursing in climate action. And I am absolutely delighted to be able to introduce our keynote speaker for this session, Martin Kalungabanda. Martin serves as core faculty member and UK representative of the Presencing Institute, the HSBC Next Generation Development Programme, and the Duke of Edinburgh's Commonwealth Study Conference Leaders Programme. In recent years, Martin has been leading several innovation processes, including building and managing sustainable cities between London and Shanghai, and solutions to water shortage in water-stressed regions between the Middle East and the UK. So Martin, it's great to have you with us, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and greetings, everyone. It's wonderful to connect with you today and to learn with you. I will share a few slides to just offer some reflections. So, planetary health. How can we sustainably live together? But more importantly, it is around the sustainability, health, and the nursing voice's way of interacting with us around issues of climate action. And for me, planetary health invites us or requires of us to look at the following elements. To achieve planetary health, we need to learn to bend the beam of observation. I will explain that. We need to learn how to move from ego to ecosystem awareness. We also need to consciously shift the operating system from which we function and to tap into multiple ways of knowing. So, in all these things we are trying to do, we are doing them in times of great disruption. And it's an understatement for me to even say great disruption. But we must remember that in moments of disruption, three types of violence are accentuated. So we know that there is such thing as direct violence. Historically, this has manifested itself through slavery, colonialism, racism, but also in our time it comes through police brutality or wars of one nation on another. But we should never forget that collectively we are meting out violence, direct violence on Mother Earth through the goods and services we produce. I will speak about that as we move on. But that comes from closed-mindedness, when we are stuck in one view and are denying the fact that this is happening. The second type of violence is called structural violence. This is manifested or shown through shocking levels of inequality. For us living in the United Kingdom, one glimpse came through during the first onset of lockdown. Schools got shut, and then children were expected to learn from home, online. That was the first time I ever witnessed how data poverty shows itself. There's so many households across the United Kingdom where there wasn't a good enough single gadget for homeschooling children, let alone the cost of data. In a nation which by every standard is wealthy. But also we see structural violence in the rigged economic system. Even within the United Kingdom, there are regions that are more better off than others, and we take it as if it's normal. Outside the United Kingdom, it's regions of the world where we see incredible levels of poverty in the midst of huge affluence. Again, when we distance ourselves from those situations within the United Kingdom, if my household can access data and we have more than 5 laptops, we do not feel for the neighbor. It's when we are stuck in one skin, we can only feel for ourselves. The third type of violence is called attentional violence, when we do not see others in their highest potential or possibility. When I look at you and I only see your limitations in the here and now. We learn this from teachers who, when they look at children, they can see something special, not just because of the little things they are seeing now, but also they can cast into 10, 15 years what this person is going to blossom into. At places of work, we can practice attentional violence when we don't see our colleagues, those we are privileged to supervise, in their highest potential. But this can also be in the family, when I don't see my spouse in her or his highest potential. And what that does is that it locks us in one identity, in one will. I will flip that later on and talk about how we can turn these 3 levels of awareness into something positive. So, the capacity to bend the beam of observation on ourselves, individually and collectively. As we are seeking to bring about planetary healing, yes, we will do a lot of things out there. But that movement of wanting to restore our forests, to clean our rivers, to clean our air, but also to organize communities differently, must be in tandem with the move to bend the beam of observation on the self. System transformation always has 2 moves: going outward, doing things out there, but at the same time, the seer must see themselves. Another term for this is called self-awareness. I was once in a small college as a student, and our professor one morning walks in with a very sad, long face, and he said, "You must have heard the sad news that I have been transferred. I know how sad you must be feeling. These things happen. I hope they bring you someone as good as I have been." With the same sad, long face, he walked out of our class. And as soon as we knew he couldn't hear us, we looked at one another and said, "Hooray!" Because for us, it was the best thing that ever happened, that he was transferred. He thought of himself as the best teacher that ever walked in our classroom. What gave him that impression, we will never know. In system transformation, we need to be as focused at the outwardness of what we are doing, as well as the inward movement at a personal and collective level. We as an organization, we do things out there, but we also must spend time reflecting in ourselves. We as a community are doing things out there, but we must also shed light on who we are and who we are becoming. It's these 2 movements that help us to bring about sustainable and transformational shifts. At the same time, we need to be aware of the core challenges we are facing in our time. The number one challenge is the ecological divide. That artificial separation we have created between ourselves and nature. It is like it doesn't really matter in our quest to satisfy our needs what we throw and harvest to and from Mother Nature. One number that makes sense to me now, if we were to continue our current patterns of consumption, we would need 1.8 planets to sustain ourselves meaningfully. We know how to create all the goods and services that are putting pressure on Earth's capacity to renew herself. By the last time I watched news, we hadn't cracked what it takes to create the other 0.8 planet we need to meaningfully survive. We are confronted by social divide. That artificial separation between self and others. Except that we are living at a time when nature has thrown at us one big lesson. There isn't other. There is just we. We saw how we felt as one globally in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. There weren't other people. We became one. So the social divide that manifests itself through some data, such as the following, is not the reality of our circumstances. Over 3.5 billion human beings on planet Earth do not know where their next meal is going to come from on a daily basis. Over 4 billion human beings on planet Earth do not have medical insurance in their vocabulary. And just watch what's happening with COVID-19. Over half of the world, even if they had money to buy the vaccine, they wouldn't access it because the wealthy nations of the world have done this to themselves without learning that it can't be safe only for a few people, because this pandemic doesn't respect national boundaries. The third component is the spiritual divide, for lack of a better term, that artificial separation between self and self, manifested by the increase in the numbers of people suffering from burnout, depression. And we have seen this increase in this era of the pandemic. We don't even yet know the statistics of what the World Health Organization gave a blip of in 2010 when they said the following, shared the following data. In 2010, if you added the numbers of people dying in all the wars we see on television and read about in newspapers, to that number, add those that are dying in floods and droughts, earthquakes. Those numbers put together, at least in 2018, were less than the number of people committing suicide. And this does not often show on our radar screen. It means more people kill themselves than they are being killed by other people. It's one massive pandemic we have. Among many other reasons why it's happening includes the quality of our relationships in the home, the quality of our relationships in the workplace, the quality of our relationships in the community. And until your own child phones and they are talking about thinking of committing suicide, you think it's at a distance. At my age now, I don't know of any family that don't know of any close or distant relation at least having attempted to commit suicide. I can talk about those three things you see, but the trick is that those are simply 10%. Like in any iceberg, they are simply 10% of the real challenge. And like in any iceberg, only 10% is visible. So for those of us that are interested in planetary health, we know that our job does not simply lie in stamping off those tips, important as that work is. Our real work, if we are looking at real transformation, our real work lies what is below the waterline, the structures we have created. Structures are not an act of God. Structures are created by you and I and those we call our leaders in the various systems in which we function. If we want to change the results of the 10% above the waterline, let's inquire into the structures. How our healthcare system is structured is a structure. How our education system is structured is a structure. For example, while still in the United Kingdom, we still have some schools where they can exclude children. In the neighborhood in Finland, they changed the structure. There is no child who is excluded from school because they know, where are you throwing this child? They mobilize resources they can to support the child so that the child continues to be part of the community, of the education system. But structures don't come by themselves. Structures come from what is between our ears. Our thinking produces the structures. How we think about things. When we didn't think men and women were equal, we gave men rights to vote. But if you think this is only in the distant past, remember when BBC admitted that they paid their women employees same qualifications, same experience. They paid women employees than the male counterparts. Our thinking produces the structures that produces the results we want or don't want. But thinking doesn't come by itself. It comes from our fundamental beliefs and values. I call that source. That source of identity, creativity, and will. So if we want planetary healing, the real work is at these three levels: structure, paradigms of thought, and source. So we can think of our job as watching, noticing, and then taking action and being intentional on which operating system we want to work. So let me show you on the left side possible operating systems. Level 1, we are simply interested in input and authority. On level 2, we are interested in output and efficiency. Operating system 3.0, we are interested in outcomes and the user and how they relate to the issue. Operating system 4.0 is when we enter the core creative and ecosystem awareness. By operating system, I simply mean like in the phone. Each time we have a phone upgrade, they notify us. In order to be able to do these functions even better, you need to upgrade your system. The same concept. In society, we have always operated and upgraded our systems. So let's give an example of learning, education. We had the traditional teacher. Pupils went as empty slate to learning. Then the teacher filled in the knowledge. Then we moved. Let's quickly train people so that we can have many experts. We upgraded our system. We realized actually learners were not empty slates. So the teacher became a facilitator so that they can facilitate something out of the pupils they are with. Then we are in some spaces, like I was talking about Finland, where they are looking at a teacher as a coach. Their job is to activate sources of learning. But how might that be in farm and food? The traditional farmer was the focus. The farmer knew everything. Then we moved to industrial agriculture because we wanted to meet the demand for food, for cotton, for many other crops. So agriculture became industrialized and monocropping. Then we see that this is not helping us. We start thinking of organic agriculture so that we can reduce the negative externalities on earth. Some people are also saying maybe now we should be thinking of agriculture and food as a medium for healing planet and people. What does that look like in health? The traditional doctor centricity. The doctor knew everything else. Open me up. In this particular case, we upgraded to evidence-based medicine. Show me what's wrong more scientifically, then we'll target in the elimination of the problem. 3.0, the patient also knows in their own healing. Four point oh, how can we strengthen our sources of well-being? That time before someone needs a doctor, a nurse. Can healthcare care for that stage as long as possible? That would be 4.0. I'm pretty sure there are many other thoughts and questions you have. In the interest of time, I will stop here for now. So, just to introduce this concept of looking outward and bending the beam of observation, you remember the movie, the Apollo 8. They lift off with the intention of going to the moon. And just as they are flying over the coast of Africa, one of the astronauts casually said, "Let's turn the camera where we are coming from." And they did. I know this is no longer magical because we have gained so much in terms of knowledge and travels to the space, but imagine this at that time. It was the very first time that we saw from a vantage point planet Earth on which we live. And here is the piece.
In 1968, Apollo 8 went to the moon.
I think the video has stopped.
They didn't land, but they did circle the moon. And I was watching it on television, and at a certain point, one of the astronauts casually said, "We're going to turn the camera around and show you the Earth." And he did. And that was the first time I had ever seen the planet hanging in space like that. And it was profound.
I think that for me, like for many other people, it was quite a shock. I don't think any of us had any expectations about how it would give us such a different perspective. I think the focus had been, we're going to the stars, we're going to the other planets, and suddenly we look back at ourselves and it seems to imply a new kind of self-awareness.
One of the astronauts said, when we originally went to the moon, our total focus was on the moon. We weren't thinking about looking back at the Earth. But now that we've done it, that may well have been the most important reason we went.
I can only describe what I've seen. You know, looking down at the Earth and you see that line that separates day into night slowly moving across the planet. Thunderstorms on the horizon casting these long shadows as the sun sets. And then watching the Earth come alive, and you see the lights from the cities and the towns.
The events you see from space, like flying over thunderstorms, looking at them from the top, were spectacular. Like a fireworks show going on, and you're looking at it from the very top.
You know, shooting stars going below us, or you know, dancing curtains of auroras. It's just very hard to describe all the, you know, the colors, the beauty, the motion.
My job as lunar module pilot was to be responsible for the lunar module itself and responsible for the science on the moon. So when we started home, I had a little more time to look out the window than the other guys because most of my responsibilities were completed. We were in a particular mode called the barbecue mode. So we were flying like this and rotating like that. What that caused to happen was every 2 minutes, a picture of the Earth, the moon, the sun, and a 360-degree panorama of the heavens appeared in the spacecraft window. And I had studied astronomy, and I had studied cosmology, and fully understood that the molecules in my body, and the molecules in my partner's bodies, and in the spacecraft, had been prototyped in some ancient generation of stars. In other words, it was pretty obvious from those descriptions we're stardust. Well, that was pretty awesome and powerful, particularly since I had a little more time at this point to be reflective and to think about it.
When we look down at the Earth from space, you know, we see this amazing, indescribably beautiful planet. It looks like a living, breathing organism, but it also, at the same time, looks extremely fragile.
Because you go outside on a clear day and it's the big blue sky, and it's like it goes on forever, right? And how could we possibly, you know, put enough stuff into it to fill it up with things that really change it? And yet, you see it from space, and it's this thin line which is just barely hugging the surface of the planet.
Anybody else who's ever gone to space says the same thing, because it really is striking and it's really sobering to see this paper-thin layer and to realize that that little paper-thin layer is all that protects every living thing on Earth from death, basically, from the harshness of space.
There's this very poetic concept that a lot of people express, that there are no boundaries from space. And I've heard a lot of my astronaut colleagues say that. Unfortunately, it's not true. You do see boundaries. They're mostly the result of human impact. You can see erosion, clear cutting of forests, and it's a long litany of environmental impact that we've had on our planet, and that's something which, when you see it from a cosmic perspective, makes you really appreciate the concept of spaceship Earth. I mean, we're all here together.
We humans are responsible for ourselves, and if we are endangering our future, then we've got to learn how to do it differently and to go forward into a sustainable period. And right now, that seems very difficult to see how it's going to be, but we've got to work on it.
When I was above the space station, looking down at the space station, and looking down at the, against the Earth, and seeing this, amazing accomplishment, I was thinking, wow, there was 15 nations that worked together to build this amazing orbital complex in space. And if we can, take these 15 nations and do this amazing accomplishment, imagine what we can do by working together, by setting aside our differences for a common goal to overcome some of the challenges facing our planet.
Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Martin. That was genuinely inspiring. I'm really struck by the idea of looking at both the planet and ourselves as if for the first time. Really thought-provoking. Thank you. I'm going to turn now to our first keynote listener response, which is from Catherine Dupre. Catherine is head of the Energy and Sustainability team within NHS Services Scotland. She provides professional advice and support with all aspects of sustainability and climate change mitigation and adaptation for health boards, for Scottish Government, and for a range of other stakeholders. And she has also, up until recently, been chair of the Sustainable Scotland Network, which is a national network for public sector sustainability and climate change professionals. So Catherine, I'm very pleased to be able to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for that, and thanks, Martin, for that great presentation up front. I think what you've heard can be quite overwhelming and quite, you sit there perhaps working in the NHS or working in community nursing going, that's all amazing, and I get all of that, and I get how important it is for planetary health that we do the right thing, but what does that mean for me? What can we actually do within the NHS? Does it actually matter to NHS Scotland? Should we be taking this stuff seriously? Absolutely, it matters for NHS Scotland. What I'm going to share with you is some of the work that we've already been doing with NHS Scotland over the past few years. You might be, some of the figures I'm going to give you, you might be quite surprised at about how well we've actually been doing in terms of climate change work. Give you a bit of some insights into the scale of the challenge going forward, and then maybe some thoughts about what you can do working in community healthcare, what you can do working in the NHS, what you can start to think about. So NHS Scotland as a whole, we have about 1,500 buildings across NHS Scotland, 200 thereabouts hospitals, but then obviously clinics, offices, depots, all sorts of buildings, residential accommodation, all sorts. It's quite a big, wide and varied portfolio. We also have, we operate over 9,000 vehicles, which again range from fairly heavy HGV type things carrying our supplies all the way down to, again, motorbikes carrying blood supplies. So there's every type of vehicle. We generate about 50,000 tonnes of clinical waste every year. And obviously in the last 18 months, that's gone up quite significantly. And we buy an awful lot of stuff. We spend about 2.7 billion on just stuff, pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, building supplies, all sorts of things. And that runs to over 1.2 million individual product lines. So when it comes to our overall carbon impact, from our buildings alone, we generate over 400,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum. Putting that into context, we represent about between 2 and 3% of emissions in the whole of Scotland. But aside from our direct emissions, it's also our indirect impact on climate change that's really important. So we're responsible for about a sixth of the workforce in Scotland. So about 160,000 staff work for the NHS, and that's not including temporary contractors. But that's a big workforce that we can influence. And every member of the Scottish population probably at some point in their lives will have an interaction with the NHS. So again, from a community point of view, how we behave from a climate change point of view, how we are perceived to be managing our estate and our vehicles and our supplies really will inspire others, and other people will look to us to lead by example. So it's really, really important that we get this right. So since 1990, so 1990 is the baseline year that the Scottish Climate Change Act is based. The UK Climate Change Act is based from the same baseline. And Scottish Government revised that Climate Change Act fairly recently, but there are quite tough legally binding targets in there for Scotland. So the Climate Change Act will state that from a 1990 baseline, by 2020, Scotland wanted to have its emissions reduced by 56%. And by 2030, 75%, by 2040, 90%, and be in a net zero position by 2045. What I'm pleased to tell you is that across the NHS Scotland estate, as of last year, our emissions are down by 64%. We are well ahead of Scottish targets. We're certainly leading in terms of the public sector in Scotland. I would argue we're probably world leading in terms of our emissions reduction. For the cynical ones amongst you, we haven't just done that because we've shut hospitals or shut sites. Our estate size has actually increased in that time. Our actual energy consumption has reduced by over 40% in the same period. So we are doing this through genuine reductions. And it was done mainly through, in the 90s, we eradicated coal from the estate. We've almost eradicated the use of heavy fuel oil as a primary heating medium across the estate, so it's only there now for backup. We've done fantastic projects around energy efficiency, so you'll now see most of our buildings now have LED lighting as opposed to the old tungsten style lighting. We've done fabric upgrades. We've done, there's been a whole plethora of projects that have happened across our estate. We've also done work around our transport. We've also done work around reducing emissions from our waste. So we've been trying to particularly drive out the use of single-use plastics, certainly in a non-clinical environment. There's been a lot of work done around green space across our estate. So we have done projects to improve about 87 hectares of our green space so that we can encourage things like active travel and get people exercising better and using that, and also seeing that green space as a good carbon sink source, so that can actually absorb some of the carbon that we emit. So there's a big, huge number of projects going on, and happy to, we can provide more information on those if anybody's interested. But I think I use this phrase quite a lot. Up until now, it's been sustainability by stealth. So I think most of you would have walked into hostel, maybe not been aware that those emissions have been reduced by 64%. You may not be aware that we've completely changed our heating, the heating system. You may not be aware that, for example, the recently opened new Balfour Hospital in Orkney is actually technically our first zero carbon hospital. So there's been a lot of these projects that have happened under the radar, and we've done it through stealth. But really now we have this big net zero challenge facing us. I did say it was 2045. It is likely that that target is going to be brought forward because, as you know, SNP has recently joined a coalition with the Greens. They're pushing for tougher targets. Scotland as a whole missed its 29, the last figures published for 2019, they missed the target. So I think there's going to be a bigger drive, and anytime there's a bigger drive from policy and legislation, it tends to come to the public sector first. So we may be asked to accelerate those targets. We can't do it by stealth anymore. It is going to require every one of our 160,000 staff to think about every aspect of what they do in their day-to-day work, and how they can perform that, how you can perform your job in a way that minimises emissions and helps towards mitigating climate change and adapting to climate change. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was the concept of just transition. A lot of, similar to health inequalities, and I think we've seen this with the COVID pandemic, the people that are impacted most in terms of the pandemic, the people that are impacted most in terms of health issues tend to be those in the more deprived parts of society, and climate change is no different. The bigger climate change impacts will be felt by those who are least able perhaps to adapt to and least able to mitigate. And it's really important that the solutions that we put in place for climate change do not make that worse, and that we do have this thing called a just transition. If I give you a for example, you'll hear politicians, you'll hear people in the media talk about how important it is that we go to all electric. So you talk about people, electricity, the grid is being gradually decarbonised. In Scotland, most of our electricity now comes from renewable means. We have got 25% of Europe's wind resource, so we've got no excuse really not to do it. However, electricity currently costs about 5 or 6 times more than gas per unit. And that means if you were to just rip out somebody's gas boiler, put in an electric equivalent, whether it be a heat pump or whatever, their running costs are going to increase quite substantially. And that has got real, that could have real issues and put people into fuel poverty. So it's not as simple as saying, well, let's just all switch to electric, because you could, that will impact those with least more. I am quite ashamed to sit here in 2021 and tell you that 1 in 4 families in Scotland are living in fuel poverty. Now, the definition of fuel poverty is that you're spending more than 10% of your income on heating your home. There are a large proportion of the population in extreme fuel poverty, and that's defined as when you're spending 20% of your income on heating your home. In our most deprived areas, so the city of Glasgow, it's 1 in 3, and if we actually go to the islands, it can be as many as 1 in 2 living in fuel poverty. I find that quite shocking in 2021. So saying to people who are already in fuel poverty, it's really important you save carbon, so we're going to take away your cheap gas and give you expensive electricity, is not a just solution. It is not a just transition. So it's really important that when we move towards zero carbon, that we're doing this in a way that is not making these people's lives worse. Also things like public transport, if we're trying to get people out of their cars and encouraging them to use public transport, again, public transport needs to be affordable. And again, illustrated by example, if you take a bus from one end of Edinburgh to the other, it costs you about £1.80 because of the Lothian buses are subsidised. The equivalent journey in Glasgow will cost you 4 times that price. So trying to say to people, yeah, take public transport, that's not helpful if that public transport is unaffordable and more expensive than them running a car. So it's really important that we look at all of these areas. When we talk about, you'll hear again people talking about the importance of low carbon diets, but again, we have got a shockingly high number of people reliant on food banks, and the last thing that they are thinking about when they are accepting their food parcels in the food bank is it low carbon? They want nutritional food that is cheap and that is readily available. So what we can do in the community is we can start to perhaps identify those people in need and look at how can we change how we work in the NHS so that we can support them and a low carbon agenda. So a couple of examples within NHS Lothian and NHS Ayrshire and Arran now have representatives from Home Energy Scotland, who are a charity that work with low-income families to try and support them to get energy efficiency improvements and to support them to get out of fuel poverty. And they will have those representatives in areas within health centres and clinics in areas of deprivation, so that they can advise patients as they're coming into those health centres where they can access support for their bills, where they can access support to get energy efficiency improvements in their homes. Down in England, a couple of trusts have actually taken that one step further, and there was a lovely project from Newcastle called Boilers on Prescription, and what they did was they had community healthcare people identifying what we call frequent flyers, so people coming in with repeated respiratory illness, and then working out that that was maybe down to poor damp housing. So then rather than them getting pills on prescription, they would actually get a boiler, or a new boiler on prescription, and they would get energy efficiency improvements. And the equivalent payback was about 2.5 years. So it's, you know, it makes really good commercial sense. So again, there's 101 examples I could give you. What I would come back to is what I said at this right at the start. This is absolutely NHS core business, both for our impact on the environment and also the impact that the environment will have on people's health, and therefore NHS's own ability to do its job going forward. So one last thing I just want to leave you with, the Lancet in 2009 recognised climate change as being the biggest global health threat. In 2015, they'd actually changed that statement, and they said that solving or mitigating climate change could be the biggest health opportunity. So if we get this right, there are health co-benefits as well. So what I would urge you to do is look at what's coming up with the new NHS Scotland Climate Change Strategy, which will be out shortly. That will solidify these commitments and dates that we have in place. There's a lot more in there around things we're going to do about our buildings and our supply chain. Look at ways that you can help. Identify those patients that may be in fuel poverty, get them the right support and advice, and let's look forward to having a net zero NHS Scotland by 2045, if not sooner.
Catherine, thank you so much. That was so informative. Really, really struck by the rates of fuel data and food poverty and the impact on the potential for climate action. Really helpful. I look forward to coming back to you in a bit on some of those things. I'm going to introduce our second keynote listener now, who is Anna Fuhrman. Anna has a background in child health nursing and also a degree in international relations. And she's currently working as a climate officer for a non-profit organisation called Healthcare Without Harm Europe. Healthcare Without Harm Europe's mission is to transform the European healthcare sector so that it reduces its environmental footprint, becomes a community anchor for sustainability, and a leader in the global movement for environmental health and justice. So Anna, I'm really looking forward to handing over to you and hearing from you now.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, Catherine, for your very good overview on the institutional or on the high level. I want to go a little bit more on the individual level now, even though Healthcare Without Harm is working also with institutions or with hospitals and health systems to reduce their emissions and their environmental destruction. But what I'm doing at Healthcare Without Harm is working with nurses individually. Maybe you would think, a pediatrics nurse, what is your motivation to work on climate change and climate activism? I have to thank Martin for summing up my reasons to getting into this field very, very profoundly. Because this inequality and injustice created by the system and realizing what impact climate change already has and what it will have if we don't react on the patients and the communities I've been working with has given me the need to work not only in a hospital, but start working on climate change and on climate action. Now, climate change is a huge problem, and you might think, why should I, as a nurse, be involved in climate action? And I want to start with the basic idea that climate change has a huge health impact. That means there are already and will be even more temperature-related illness and death. There are going to be injuries and illnesses due to extreme weather events. Infectious disease vectors are going to spread, and there are going to be increases in waterborne illnesses, as well as wide-ranging impacts from air pollution. And on top of all that, there are going to be huge extreme weather events, which I have to say have already arrived in Europe, even though sometimes we tend to think all these things are happening far away, but it's also happening here. And the biggest surprise, or the biggest negative surprise for me, was that actually healthcare and the care that I was providing as a nurse has a huge impact on climate. Healthcare is super energy intensive. It creates a lot of waste from single-use items. And we are responsible as the healthcare sector worldwide for around 4.4% of all the net emissions in the world. And I think it is a responsibility from us then to also reduce this impact that we have, because we're hurting communities and our patients with that. Like Catherine said, climate change is not only a huge challenge, but also an opportunity, especially for nurses, because we can use the trust that our patients, the communities we work in, set in us, because nurses have been voted as the most trusted profession nearly worldwide for decades. And we can use that trust that people set in us to educate them about the health impacts of climate change and why it is important to do something now. With the Nurses Climate Challenge, my project at Healthcare Without Harm, I'm trying to challenge what Martin called the structure. By giving the nurses I'm working with the confidence to speak up and give them also the network to be active against climate change. The network is European-wide, so climate change doesn't stop at the border, so why should we? And a big part of it is strengthening the well-being through climate action, because most of the actions against climate change are no-regret actions. There are health co-benefits included in it, and there is no regret of implementing them. So maybe finally, what can you do? What I'm doing in the Nurses Climate Challenge is I create and collect resources with my team for you to learn. So you can inform yourself, you can learn what is the impact of healthcare on climate change. You can inform yourself what climate change is going to do to the patients you're working with. And you can go out and advocate and educate. So talk to your colleagues, talk to your local politicians, and be confident. You would be surprised how much people will listen to you if you're just confident. And then finally, I'm also collecting case studies from nurses who have implemented great projects to reduce the impact of healthcare on climate change, and change their practice to protect the environment, protect their patients, create high resilience against climate change impacts. And that platform is open for everybody to use. It's free to use, and I invite everybody to come and join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, so much for sharing your reflections with us. Now that we've heard from all three speakers, our session is going to move into a shared conversation, which should give us a little bit of space to develop and explore some of the ideas and the themes raised, and might spark some new insights that we haven't yet discussed. So I think we should be having Martin and Catherine back on the screen just now so that they can join. Lovely. And I thought just to give you the chance first, Martin, to come to you first and ask maybe what curiosities or thoughts might have been prompted for you in response to listening to Catherine and
Anna. Listening to both Catherine and Anna, I again begin to touch how this is rooted in our day-to-day living. Sometimes when we present issues maybe in the manner that I described them, because I describe the big picture, the global, what is happening around us. But actually, this is in our homes, this is in our communities and in our workplaces. And it's those little efforts that we make at the personal, family, organizational level that will amount to the reverse of that which is heaping on the challenge we are now globally confronting. That's what caught my attention when I listened to both Catherine and Anna.
Yes, and I had a similar thought about our tendency to think in levels and to divide things into big, medium, and little in terms of sizes, or thinking about things from a distance or close up. And actually, your way of setting out structures, thoughts, and then sources of identity and values seem to help with connecting the three different perspectives today. But the big picture from space is a big picture, but it's one of the things that creates a source of identity and value in giving the motivation to get involved in things in everyday clinical work or everyday life. Catherine, I wonder if you want to come in and just give your response to some of that.
Yeah, I do think definitely we have to change the mindset about how we work. There's I hate to use this phrase, but there's a phrase that I use quite a lot, and I've spoken about it when I've done work with the Sustainable Scotland Network. There's almost like a public sector sense of mediocrity. Like there's this great phrase in Scotland: "It's no for the likes of us," and sometimes we have a tendency in the public sector to do the bare minimum because we're always worried about taxpayers' money. We're always worried about, not being seen to be doing anything too flashy, and that can actually almost stifle innovation. And I think certainly when it comes to climate change and some of these huge topics and this huge problem, it's not going to be addressed by traditional ways of working, traditional ways of thinking, traditional ways that we've managed the business. We have to think completely differently. And I also think what we need to do from an NHS context is almost put climate change in the same box as we put infection control. So if you do a new building or a new project within NHS Scotland, you will always have infection control as the little imp on the shoulder telling you what you can and can't do, and that can be a showstopper for a project. If we have climate change treated in the same way, so that you can't do a project unless it is the lowest carbon option, and it's and we put it that way, then that takes away some of the trying to get the commercial argument through, trying to get the whole hearts and minds argument through. It would just happen. So we almost need to start treating it in that way. But I do think we need to not be as afraid of doing these innovative ways of working and thinking about things quite differently, and bringing in partners that we've maybe not traditionally worked with. Again, we're quite in the public sector. We can get into the silo working, and that's not helpful. Climate change solution has to be place-based. We have to look at this in the round. So if you're looking at a project, you have to work with local authorities. You have to work with maybe higher and further education. We have to, God forbid, work with the private sector as well, who may be working in the same space. Everybody has to come together and look at solutions in the round, and that then will have an impact perhaps on how we manage contracts and how we do finance and things. So yeah, we have to embrace different ways of working, otherwise this just won't happen.
Anna, I wonder if you'd like to come in just to give your responses to hearing from both Catherine and Martin.
Sure. Well, I agree, we have to definitely change our ways of working. And I think it's important that it's not only happening from top down, so that it's not only the estates managers and the sustainability managers that know about it, but that everyone knows why it's happening and are not pushing against it because it's something new and something that hasn't happened before and not what we've been doing for the past 20 years. And I know sometimes change can be a little bit scary, but I think it's important to know why we're doing it. And if we know that and everybody knows why we're doing it, we might also get more creative, and like the healthcare professionals working on the ground who know the specific population and the patients they're working with and how it's working on their ward might also come up with some really great solutions that you won't see if you just have the big picture. So I absolutely agree with Kate for like changing the ways of working also in which ideas we accept, maybe.
Thanks, Anna. And you've touched on one of the questions that has been posted by Cameron Crossley. And Martin, I might come to you for this just to give you a chance to think and listen. How do you know where to start when making changes for a greener space? Because it can be intimidating when you think of all the many things that you need to do. And I guess just adding to that, I was thinking that you talked about how challenging it is to be doing this in a time of great disruption as well. So I wonder if you might want to share some thoughts on that.
It's a brilliant and yet tough question. For me, it began with educating myself, increasing my awareness, not only to see with my brain, but to allow my heart to see, because somehow we have the capacity as human beings to close our eyes when we see something and we can look away. Fortunately, the heart doesn't have that capacity. It cannot unsee. So when Catherine talks about energy poverty, and I hear the manner in which she described what that poverty is, the seeing doesn't happen here with these eyes. The seeing happens with the heart, because I know what it means to be in energy poverty. When the heart sees, you won't look away. You cannot not do. You almost naturally lose the freedom to look away. And that's what makes us then to begin to do very simple things, as simple as I'm brushing my teeth and water comes at a cost. I know I'm capable of paying, but there are other people who need water, not only in my compound, but also in the rest of the world. And therefore, I will switch off the tap, not leaving water running when I'm brushing my teeth. There is no need for me to run my dishwasher because it's only half full. I could wait until it's full. So it goes to begin with small little things around me. And when I'm fortunate enough to have either my children or other young people around me, to engage them so that they too learn to see not only with the eyes, but learn to see with the heart. Because when the heart sees, it doesn't know how to fake. That would be my small beginnings to that tough question, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I'm going to pick up on some of the things you said there. There's a comment in the chat, but Anna, I think I might come to you just to give you a chance. From Barbara McFarlane just saying, I'm appalled that many of our people depend on electricity via pay meters, which are so much more expensive than for those of us who can afford to pay by direct debit. I'm enraged by the injustice. How can we change these things when massive power companies are making vast profits but are controlling and enslaving people?
Can I come in on that?
Yes, you can, and then Anna, you need to unmute
sorry.
when you come back. No, it's fine, Catherine, go for it just now while Anna unmutes.
Just in case people aren't aware, your electricity bill, only 35% of your electricity bill is under the control of the energy companies, and that's the wholesale cost. The remainder of the electricity bill, 65% or thereabouts, is because of taxes and levies that are added on, and the electricity companies have no control over those. They are set at Westminster level, they're not even set at Holyrood level. And ironically, a lot of those taxes and levies are for low carb, are to support low carbon, so things like feed-in tariff, contracts for difference, etc., etc. So much as, you know, we can all go on about how awful the energy companies are in terms of profit, actually there's very, very little that they can control. So the way, if you're going to tackle electricity costs, you have to tackle those taxes and levies and get those down. If you don't do that, then you could have it doesn't matter, the wholesale cost could go down to zero and you would still have people in fuel poverty. So it's quite a complicated thing. I agree that prepayment meters are just nasty, and I don't think we should have different tariffs depending on whether you're paying direct debit or whether you're on a prepayment meter. I do feel that that there should just be a flat tariff, that everybody should pay the same. But yeah, the companies are bad, but there's only a certain amount that's in their control. So actually what we should be doing is lobbying government to say they need to sort out the inequity around all of these additional charges that go on, because some of them are quite shocking, and some of those have gone up exponentially in the last 10 years. So yeah, that's what we need to do.
Brilliant, thank you, Catherine. Anna, do you want to come in as well on that question?
Sure. I just wanted to quickly answer to Martin, because you're saying that where to start is like to open your heart and see with your heart. And I have to say, maybe I disagree a tiny bit, because I think many people are already seeing those things very clearly. And the reason for like inaction is often not because they're not seeing it or not feeling it, but because they don't know what to do. And if you are stuck in this moment of not knowing what to do and not being able to react, that leads to what you've all been talking about, the burnout, depression. So it's like some kind of protection mechanism to just close your eyes and be like, I can't deal with this now because I don't know what to do. And that's why I find it so important to not only look at it, but also talk to people, find the people that are also moved by it and think it's wrong. Because, I mean, we're fortunate to be living in a democracy, and we can speak up and we can form groups and talk and ask our politicians, ask anybody who has the power to change things to do that. And I think because we're so fortunate to have that, we should use that and, not only feel it, but also start doing something.
That's great. Thank you, Anna.
I would agree with you, Anna, because I think it's a sequence. In a way, it is a layer of awareness. Once, I always say this, the seeing with the eyes sometimes is confused with seeing with the heart. When you see with the heart, you start looking for action. When you see with the eyes, it's still something you are still looking. But when, for example, again, going back to what Catherine said, when you decouple the different elements that go into the price of electricity, then you begin to see, first of all, knowledge awareness comes in. Actually, the villain might not just be the electricity company, or it is not even the electricity company. What else constitutes the 70% of the cost? That movement begins to touch the heart, and then you see why it is a matter of will. If we wanted, we could do something about it. And I agree with you, Anna, that's what leads into organizing. In the end, we have to organize. In the end, we have to ask one another and make a demand that we can live better than what we are doing now. So when I talk about inequality, particularly in societies such as we are living in, it is not true that there is a lack of. It is a rigged economic system which has been said to work in favor of a certain category of the population. But if we really want planetary health, we really need to widen our sense of who else matters. And we should be, as we have seen during COVID, that unless everyone is well, we are not well. And that's a new thinking for most people who make decisions. It looks like no-brainer for us, but it's new thinking. And yet part of our education system does even teach people to categorize. You are not well off because you are lazy. No, there are certain boundaries that we need to make for granted. I was giving the example of Finland, where they make a decision. No child will be allowed to drop out of school. And resources then are mobilized that way. We can make a decision, no home must suffer from energy poverty. And in this society, it would happen at the stroke of the finger like that. But it needs organizing to educate even those we think are our leaders.
Thank you. That's interesting. And it made me think of our Queen's nurses and the Queen's Nurse programme. And they often talk about finding your tribe, finding the people who think and care about the same things that you do, and joining together somehow to make something happen, to make something different and better happen. Anna, I might come to you first for a question about a slightly different challenge, which has come from Antonia Hammond, saying that NHS staff sometimes are terrible at recycling despite the provision of appropriate bins in many places. How can we change this and make it a priority for people? I wondered what your thoughts are. And then Catherine, I might come to you. I know you've typed an answer. But
I think the key to solving that issue is education, and that at different levels. I think, first of all, the education about why it's important to recycle, why it's important to avoid waste, all of the planetary health topics that come with it need to be taught already at nursing school level. I think in the UK, it's not even included, like no planetary health topic is included in the curriculum. And I think it's immensely important that changes. I know there's a lot of schools that are already doing their best to integrate it, but maybe again, that's a structure problem. And then also the healthcare professionals that are already working on the ward need to educate themselves, educate their colleagues on why this is an issue. Because usually when people understand that it is a problem, they do it. But if they're not aware, if they're keeping their eyes closed and think it's just something annoying that I have to do now because somebody in the administration told me so, then they will never do it. They need to really see why it is important. And I guess you can easier understand that if it's a peer or somebody from your team telling you, hey, this is actually super important, please do it.
Thanks, Anna. Catherine, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, just as our final comment.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, certainly in the education piece, it's really important that people are aware of what can be recycled and how they can recycle it. I think in a high pressure clinical environment, it can be quite challenging to say to somebody, think about, you know, what goes in and what bin. And sometimes it's just, particularly if you've got that, is it clinical waste, is it not clinical waste, you know, has it been contaminated, has it not, and then you kind of go, do you know what, I'll err on the side of caution, I'll shove it into clinical waste. There needs to be better education around what shouldn't go into clinical waste, maybe even just giving people awareness of the cost to treat, you know, a ton of clinical waste as opposed to a ton of just domestic waste or recycling. It's really stark, the difference, so even making people aware of that. But I think also there's other things that we need to do. We need to look at the packaging of some of our products, and I know that colleagues in national procurement have been working quite hard on that with our suppliers. You may be interested to know, for example, that the original PCR testing kits, we sent back to the original supplier to say the packaging's terrible, get it sorted, and they managed to reduce the packaging by about 80%, just through some interventions. So there's things like that we can challenge our suppliers so that the packaging itself is recyclable, and also in a way that makes it easy for us to be able to split it without compromising infection control. We also need to do things like there was a lovely project from, I think it was NHS Grampian, where there were theatre packs that were being opened
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Catherine. Well, it's time now for me to thank Martin, Catherine and Anna for joining us this afternoon and for creating together a really thought-provoking and enlightening session. And we very much appreciate your energy and your expertise. It's time now for me to give the stage to our resident poet for this session, Dr. Mandy Haggith, who has spent some 20 years travelling the world as an environmental activist. Mandy has previously been the poet in residence at Edinburgh's Botanic Gardens and also at Inverewe Gardens, and she's currently a lecturer in literature and creative writing at the University of the Highlands and Islands. The author of 4 novels, 4 poetry books, a poetry anthology, and a non-fiction book, Mandy is passionate about the environment, especially forests and the sea, and we're really pleased and excited to hear her poetry, written today in direct response to this session, and recited by her now. So Mandy, the floor is all yours.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and I hope I can do this without breaking up. I found this a really immensely moving session, and so thanks for having me. Thank you, nurses. Thank you, Martin. You made me cry. You bent my beam of observation. You took me to the moon to look back at the earth, where there is no us and them. There is only we. Though some of us are hungry, too many of us are in poverty, in misery. You took me to the moon to look back at the earth, at the glory of our home, Mother Earth, her colours, her beauty, her motion. You took me to the moon to look back at the earth. I give way to emotion. Allow my heart to see. You gave us time to be reflective, to see our big blue sky as a thin blue line, barely hugging the planet. Let's hug the planet. Our big blue sky protecting us from death, as you do, nurses. Thank you. Protecting us from disease, saving us from a suicide pandemic, healing our divided selves, our divided society, our planetary home. Leading us from disruption, denial, desensing, depression, to an eruption of healing, excitement, enchantment, expression. To challenge our structures, to reboot our systems, to be brave. Let's bend our beams, our beaming smiles back on ourselves as part of nature, as part of a global unity, as one undivided identity. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Catherine, Anna, Sarah, Tasha. Thank you, nurses. You make us cry, but we bend our beams, we think, and with our hearts, we see. Thanks all. Thank you all for coming.